Welcome back, ATL. We're back in studio tonight. We're so excited. This month, April, we are highlighting some amazing trailblazers that have such profound stories that's been changing the world, changing communities in different ways. And tonight, I'm so honored to have Fransau with us, Mcdonald, and he's going to be talking to us about his story and his organization. And y'all, you want to stay to the end because this right here is a story that needs to be heard throughout the entire world. So Fransau, thank you so much for sharing space and being with me tonight. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'm very honored.
Thank you.
At this opportunity. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So as is tradition, I'll read his bio and then we're going to jump into our conversation. But I want every young man, father, uncle, anybody that is listening, you might be a male, I want you to really tune in because this story is really going to touch you. So Fransau, he's a public speaker, a youth minister, and the founder of Felons to Favor Incorporated. That's located out in Atlanta, Georgia. He grew up in a rougher area of Denver, and Fransau was swiftly engrafted into drug and gang violence at a very early age. By the time he was an adult, he had developed a reputation as well as a number of enemies throughout the Denver metro area. After a barbershop incident took place in January of 2004, Fransau was charged with first-degree murder and later convicted of involuntary manslaughter. He served close to 3 years in prison, but immediately relocated to Atlanta, where he founded Felons to Favor Incorporated, which is a nonprofit organization designed to support formerly incarcerated men and women with essential needs such as mental health, therapy, job placement, and career development training. And today, Fransau works with churches, local schools, as well as the Department of Juvenile Justice to mentor and develop at-risk youth. This is amazing. Thank you so much. And I know this is just your story and just going around. And I know I asked you before we started, have you told the story before? And you said you've told it on many platforms. And so people you've been getting the word out.
Absolutely. Every time I've shared my story, my testimony, I get that same facial expression. Mm-hmm. Eyes go up, eyebrows go up, and then the following the facial expression is, have you written a book or is this a movie? Mm-hmm. And my next answer is yes. The book is in the making.
I love it.
God has given me a vision for the movie, but it's truly just to the glory of God and what He's done and what He's brought me through in order to be here to tell and encourage someone to let them know that they can get through whatever they're going through as well.
I love it. So let's jump into it. Tell us about your story, your testimony, your inspiration from Felons, and I see you repping it. From Felons to Favor, 2 Corinthians 5:17. Tell us your story. Where did this come from? Where was it birthed?
Well, it speaks volumes to the scripture. If any man be in Christ, old things have passed away. Behold, all things have become new. And me being completely a new creation. If you knew me from my past, if you knew Fransau, or what they used to formerly call me as Menace Loke, and then Dirty Squaw, and the transition from boy to manhood, you would understand, the reason for Felons to Favor, and and how it also relates to biblical examples of who God chose to use in the Bible.
Absolutely.
Murders, of those that were in prostitution and so on and so forth, those that were counted out the underdogs, and bringing them into a place of favorability, and they're well noted throughout the Bible.
I love that.
And I believe that's what God is doing today, is noting those that He has found favor in, that have come from the least likely of backgrounds. And that's just me. Growing up in Denver, Colorado, we relocated from Oklahoma at the age of 5.
Okay.
Of course, my mother moving away from my father and the male figure and the male figures, uncles and so on and so forth. I found myself in a single parent household. 3 girls, my sisters, and I being the youngest, me being the youngest, and my mother. So 4 women in the household, me being the baby, if you will, growing up in Denver, Colorado. She moved us to Denver at the age of 5 again, and we were in apartment complex, which is somewhat of, most apartment complexes in Montbello, a suburb out of Denver, Colorado, urban area, in the 80s. Right. Now, 80s, Denver, Colorado, I always have to revert back to what things that were going on in the 80s.
Sure.
Starting with gang culture in California. So gang culture swiftly moved across from California, and as it moved across the nation in the 80s, you started to see the influence and the cultural influences in music. You started to see the cultural influences in communities as well. With gang culture came also drugs and so on and so forth. So you've seen the crack era hit in the 80s. Yes. You've seen a lot of fathers being displaced out of the home, whether they were on drugs or they were incarcerated, mass incarceration.
And there were policy implications to why
there were policy implications.
Well.
Correct. So then you've seen a lot of youth raising themselves. Now, Crips and Bloods, of course, formed as a result of community activism, but started to change, of course, into something that was more violent and something that had good intention, but it shifted into something that started to hurt the community. You had young men raising themselves. And by nature, I think we're all tribal. So you look back even through biblical times, you had tribes and tribes on tribes on tribes, the Havites, the Jebusites, the ites, right?
That's right.
And leading up to even to today, I think we're still tribal, but it's more of a protection thing.
Right.
So for me, growing up, there was only so many times I walked around the corner and got my butt whooped or got beat up before I stopped coming around the corner by myself, right? And that's where you start to get territorial. You start to get 55th Street, Crib, 55th Street, or so-and-so streets. So gang culture swept across in Denver, Colorado. And it started to impart to my neighborhood. You had a lot of gang members that came from California and would take people from Denver, Colorado back to California.
Wow.
Not just to get drugs, but to get put on gangs. They came back and start putting people in grafting people in our neighborhoods.
So they went to other places, areas to actually...
They recruited. It was a recruit, and draft and recruit. And I don't think it was intentional, but you meet people from different places. A lot of those gang members that had to move for one reason or another, they shifted, and then the influence is very similar to you going to your cousin's house for the summer in Texas, and then you come back speaking their language, you come back dressing like them, and I used to go to Texas to visit, and I come back talking about already, and certain lingo and so on and so forth. But what happened was gang culture swept in, and from neighborhood to neighborhood, you started to see the influence. So me growing up in elementary school, a lot of my friends on this side of the street in Montbello, or this side of, we call it Crown Market, it was a corner store. We noticed the shift, and on every block you started to notice a crack house or crack homes or crack houses. And a lot of my friends that I grew up with, they were in very similar positions as me, where our families, our mothers were, struggling to provide and having to work longer hours, and know who raised you was your brothers and sisters. And if your brother or your sister was involved in gang activity or a part of gang culture, which 9 out of 10 times they were at least wearing a color or saying cuz or blood in those times, or folk, if you were in Chicago or whatever the region was, you started to develop that same language and those same habits and become a part of that culture. So in my area, it was predominantly Crips. I had an older cousin, which his birthday is today. Rest in peace, Ace. He was a blood though, and I remember him coming to the house and us sort of taking pride in knowing that we had some type of protection, and he would beat me up and and sort of make me a little tougher, but at the same time he was what I looked up to become a man. And then those in the neighborhood, the same thing. So my definition of a man came from my exposure, or limited exposure for that matter. So gang culture also taught you respect. It taught you respect for yourself, how to gain respect for yourself, reputation, so on and so forth, but also respect for another. And then they had all of these laws or bylaws, if you will, as it related to snitching, as it related to how you get down, you never let nobody punk you, and so on and so forth. And you sort of start to take that. So me growing up from the age of first grade and 6, 7 years old, I had been suspended every year of school.
Wow.
if not in-school suspension, suspended, or expelled from school from first grade all the way leading up to my 12th grade year. I
what
fought
were some of the
every year.
reasons why you were being suspended, and do you feel like the school system could have done something better to really like intervene?
That's a good question. I feel like there were a lot of needs that I had as a young man growing up in that type of society, in that type of environment, like most young men now. One, again, is limited exposure to things outside of your normal environment. So if all you see is gangsters and all you see is drug dealers, and that's you see them driving cars, you see them looking nice, you see them with the nicest shoes, that becomes your definition of success.
Right.
So therefore, that's what you gravitate towards, right? It wasn't until my mom, she would send us to church, and there was a guy that used to come through the apartment complex, and he would come in a bus, and he would pick up all the kids in our neighborhood and take us to the other side of town. And
you got exposure.
And we got exposed a little bit, and I would see, and one time he came, he dropped everybody off, and he asked my mother if I can come to his house and play with his son. His son and I had developed a relationship. I went that way, and I'm looking at these big houses as we're driving through this neighborhood, and I think I stayed a couple days, and they invited me back a couple times. And I'm playing with his son in the front yard, and we're throwing the ball, and I'm just looking around, and I just remember thinking, like, I've never seen anything like this. I would love to have more of this. Why can't this be my reality? And I also remember not wanting to go home. Not that my home was just that bad of a home. My mom raised us right. We always had food to eat. We were taken care of very well. But it was something that I was exposed to that I gravitated towards. And now, as I look at the past, I always think, what could my life have been outside of a different environment? You become, a product of your environment. So gang culture just sort of shifted me into more of a survival mode. So everywhere you went, you were just sort of survival mode. You would get older people pulling up to you if you had the wrong color on.
Wow.
And they're sort of checking you. It was sort of like the movies. You remember Boys in the Hood, you remember South Central, you remember stuff like that. And even at a young age, you were sort of engrafted into some of that, just by way of just being there.
Wow.
So that was sort of my reality. And a lot of my friends, almost every single one of my best friends in elementary school, in middle school, we all suffered the same fate of incarceration. And some of them are still incarcerated to this day. If I showed you a picture of us in elementary school, I can point out at least 95% of the people in the school or in my class.
When you say 95%, you mean like in a class picture or school picture?
Class picture, school picture, or even in those that I hung around my immediate circle. Spend the night at their house and so on and so forth. And it wasn't until I started to see their parents, and then you start to see the drug dealers interacting with parents or on those streets, and then you start putting two to two together, like, oh, they do drugs. They're crack dealers. They must do crack, or they must, you know what I mean? And you start putting those things together, and it becomes more of something that's so common, it just becomes natural to see.
Normal.
It becomes the norm.
Kind of desensitizes you.
In
terms of like, this is just the way life is.
Absolutely.
Unless you have that exposure like you had when you went with that person from church to play with his son, you was able to see something different. But when you've known is that
you're coming back to you're coming back into your community, coming back into your society, and you sort of get that feeling like, oh, this is my reality. And for us, we had about 5 elementary schools in our community. All of those elementary schools bust into one middle school. And then they all also shared the same high school. So once those 5 schools came into that same middle school, they bussed us sort of, I'm not going to say across town, but it was shortly outside of our comfort zone. And then we're all in this one school, MLK, Martin Luther King Jr. Middle school. And then we used to call it sort of like gladiator school, because it was sort of like you got into there, and it was so intimidating. From elementary school, you heard about it, and then you got there, and it was literally everything you heard about plus some, and then some.
So you essentially had to, and you talked about fighting, right? Every year from first grade to your senior year of high school, you fought. But a part of fighting was that you did what you had to do. You did what you only knew to do. and the environment required you to fight.
When I tell you, it started with clique culture. Like I said, you go around the corner. It started with like street football. We used to have our own teams, our own street, and then we named ourselves Auckland Way Posse. And then we would go play the street, around the corner, and we used to fight them. We literally get into fights with them. And then you get into middle school, you start to develop your own cliques. And I used to have, I grew up with a very diverse set of friends, Asian, Hispanic, best friends, white best friends. But by the time I got in middle school, that started to shift as well, culturally and racially as well.
Right.
So now the Hispanic friends that I had started to hang out with the Hispanics.
Right.
And then the Asian friend I had started to hang out with the Asian. And then, of course, I'm hanging out with the black friends and the African American friends that I have. And now if my friends have problems with their friends, it leaves us as enemies.
Right.
And that's how we start to develop, rivalries in our neighborhoods. So by the time I got into high school, my clique was, associated with another well-known gang in the neighborhood, which was Gear Gang Crips. And these Crips were probably one of the most hated.
Different sects of Crips.
Of Crips in the same neighborhood. And you had Bloods in the same neighborhood. I think ours was very diverse because you had other sections of Denver, Colorado in the city. If you go to Park Hill, is an area in Denver, it's mainly predominantly Bloods because one of the Bloods from California came from California and recruited and developed, and next thing you know, and the same thing on East Denver, you had East Side Crips, and
it sounds this is
very similar to any community.
So off, right? But probably like a spin because I think about things a little different.
Yeah,
it sounds like community organizing,
absolutely,
and it sounds like they had some mastermind skills
when I tell
and
you.
Planning and organizing, bringing people together, like skills that could actually be used to build and empower communities.
I'm glad you say that because these are truly skill sets. You're talking about CEOs of major corporations that just so happen to fit in gang culture.
Right.
Unfortunately, if they took, and a lot of them have, much to their credit, a lot of the guys that I network with now are businessmen that shifted that skill set and become CEOs of corporations and just use that same leadership skills, those same leadership skills to develop, a company or even community programs and projects.
Right.
It's just a matter of skill set and shifting skill set.
Transferable skills.
That's exactly what it is.
Exactly. And that's what I see because I'm also an entrepreneur. So when I hear this, I'm like, wow, we could use some skills.
Organized crime is the same as an organized business. When I tell you they had, again, bylaws and laws that you had to live by, when they had certain structure and you have rankings, it's very similar to a structure of a career path. You have a little G, you got a G, you got an OG.
You break down those,
and you start breaking down.
Can you break those roles down to us for those that may not know?
Well,
little G, OG, and the other
it's very
ranking
similar. It's very similar. For me, I took on the name of Dirty Swa, which was someone, my big brother, if you will. He was my sister's baby's father, but he took me under his wing. His name was Dirty Ray. He fell up under a Dirty Ray, another Dirty Ray, which is Ray Jackson, who played in the NFL. But fortunately, he wasn't in a gang, but it's still gang culture that shifts.
Right.
And then I had a best friend by the name of Andre, but he fell up under Little Hawk. His big homie, or his OG, he was in a gang, was Big Hawk. And then, it was the rankings. If you looked like, or if you were very similar to in your demeanor, you were somewhat, that's how they engrafted you.
Right. But what I'm hearing the pattern is the structure, but you're taking on the name like a father.
A father, a mentorship, a father,
right.
Just same thing in the organization is your direct. You have your manager, you have your director, and the person who brought the gang to that neighborhood, or the person who started it, is more than likely the highest ranking in there, and they hold rank. If you go into the penitentiary, if you go into incarcerated societies, it's very similar, and you have someone that's in control, or one that is leading, directing, and you have to rank up. You can get in violation if you do something the wrong way, or if you say the wrong thing, if you snitched on somebody, or if you did something wrong.
Be consequences.
There's consequences.
Right.
And there's viulations, and there's ways that they handle that.
There's an entire culture and structure around this. And you are like a expert in this. Like, you can teach it and break it down, and it's important because I think, especially for people that may want to start youth programs or are running youth programs, gang intervention programs.
Absolutely. You have to understand
they
what
don't
they've
know the
gone
culture.
through. You have to understand
They
the
don't
culture.
know the
You have to
culture.
understand what they grew up in. You have to understand what made them shift that way in the first place, which is usually rejection, which is usually abandonment, which is usually lack of role models and role models and leadership. And again, that's what shifted me that way. So by the time I got in high school, my clique, my immediate clique, we call ourselves the LOCs, which is really just a subset of the Gear Gang Crips, because all my friends ended up getting put on that particular gang. Fortunately enough, my big brother sort of took me under his wing and kept me from getting put on. But I developed, as you read in my bio, I developed a lot of those enemies. So by the time I got out of high school, I developed a reputation of being around them, so I might as well have been from. And that's why a lot of my friends that got put in the gang, even at older ages, because they already had the enemies of the gang in the first place.
How did enemies come in gang world? Like, what happens that...
Well, I mean,
start to
usually a lot of times it starts with something that has nothing to do with you and had something to do with the OG or somebody that got into it with somebody else. They may have gotten into a fight, and then there's a killing or a shooting, and now it's your responsibility to uphold the rivalry, and everybody else's responsibility. It trickles down. There were two particular gangs, well-known gangs, Gear Gang Crips, and then the Horton Boy. Hortons were actually a family, but became more known as a gang because they were so tight in structure and organization, and they started to put people on that weren't a part of the bloodline, but just wanted to be down with their family. And this was a major rivalry in the neighborhood. And me, by hanging out with the Gear Gangs, I had friends that were Hortons, but we became rivals just as guilty by association. Same thing with the East Side Crips, and that's sort of how not sort of, but how I got incarcerated, or what led to my incarceration. I had a friend. He went out one night, and me and him have been friends since middle school. He went out one night. This is after we got out of high school. He goes out. He calls me. I said, no, I'm hanging out with my girl. I'm chilling. And he goes out, gets into a fight with some guys. The next week, he tells us they jump him and so on and so forth. He describes them. He sort of knows who they are. So, of course, I say, all right, well, next time we see him, it's on site. We can't do nothing about it right now. Sure enough, we go out a couple weeks later, and we see those same people. And I wasn't even supposed to be out that night. I was sort of or taking myself out of it. And, I was about to move out of because I felt something. I felt something. But I still went out that night. And next thing you know, we see those guys. We're getting into a limousine. We had a limousine that night. It was someone's birthday. And he points them out. And I say, okay, it's on. So me and all the other friends, all the other homies that was with us, we square up on them. I end up punching one of the guys. Big guy. It's the same guy he had got into it with. And I laid him out that night, and it was a bunch of us. It was a bunch of them. That sort of spread everybody out. And we got into the limousine, drove off. They ended up shooting at the limousine that night. So we knew to be on alert. The limousine driver stops and says, hey, we got bullet dents in the limousine. We don't know what's going on. We seen the Cadillac. We didn't know they were shooting at us. Luckily, nobody got hit. But all that week, news travels really fast through small communities and neighborhoods and people that know people. And instead of those same people bringing the two together and the two parties together and saying, hey, let's talk this out, like most neighborhoods, they egg it on. Hey, so-and-so said who? So-and-so said what? So we're hearing that, and they ain't doing nothing but hyping us up. I punched the guy, so they ain't doing nothing but hyping him up. So the next week, the following week, I'm getting off of work. I'm going to the barber shop. I end up picking up my younger cousin. He's about 16, 17 at the time. I go to the barber shop. And while I'm in the barber shop, it's a Friday night, typical Friday night where everybody's getting ready for the weekend. It's a packed barber shop that weekend. And mind you, I'm in the world at that time. I'm in gang culture. I'm trying to get out. But I see some of the guys that were from the neighborhood of the guys that we got into a fight with the week before. I know those guys. They know me. They give me the eye. I give them the eye. And next thing you know, you see one of them going in and out of the barbershop on the phone. He comes back. He stands behind me. I have this uneasy feeling. And by this time, I had gave my life to Christ, but I wasn't living for the Lord at that time completely. So I'm still feeling the presence of the Holy Spirit, and something telling me something's happening.
Right.
So I'm irritated. I'm irritated with my younger cousins for getting in the barber chair. I asked the barber, I said, hey, man, how much longer before you done with this haircut?
Right,
I probably said it a little differently back then.
Right.
But he gives me this devious eye, and he says, I'm almost done. Lo and behold, I did not know that he was actually friends with the guys that were behind me and the friends with the guys that shortly came through the door after that.
Right.
So as I have my head down and I'm in my phone, I get rushed by a couple guys. And these guys sort of blindsided me while I got my head down.
Right.
And next thing you know, I look up, I hear one of the barbers say, hey, can we help y'all with something? Y'all need a cut? And as soon as I look up, I'm being bum rushed by two guys, the guys behind me, and then the barber and my younger cousins right here. So there's this big commotion. At the time, I wore glasses before I had LASIK recently. And I hit the ground, my glasses fly off. And while I'm on the ground, there's guys standing over me. And then there's a commotion in the barbershop. And next thing you know, a gun drops in front of me.
Right.
And I did what most normal people would do. I picked the gun up, and as I picked the gun up, I get up off the ground, and everybody spreads.
Right.
Well, one of the guys grabbed a child, a girl who was a young lady that was getting her hair done, a baby. She could have had to been 6 or 7 years old.
Goodness.
Uses her as a shield.
Oh, my goodness.
One of the other guys uses the barber as a shield. And as he runs out of the barbershop, I chase him and I run. And this is happening so fast, and everything's sort of like silent, and everything's just sort of blank. And these are just flashes that I recall. But I do remember as soon as I hit the door, shooting the gun. Pow! And as soon as I shot the gun, I can barely see. I'm blurry. And at that time, you know, my lenses were pretty thick.
Right.
My younger cousin pushes me out the door, and he says, run, run, run. And he says, give me the keys. So he's sort of thinking for me at 17 years old. I'm in a panic. I still don't realize everything that's happening, everything that's going on.
Right.
He comes to pick me up in my car. I had a Ford Explorer Expedition, or Ford Explorer Eddie Bauer edition, and he picks me up. He tells me to run. He picks me up, throws the door open. I look in my hand. I still got this gun in my hand. I jump in the car. He's speeding off, can barely drive because he doesn't have his license. He's 15, he's just learning how to drive, 16, 17 years old. I tell him to drive around to the back of the barbershop because I can't see and I know he can't drive. And I said, hey, just drive around to the back of the shopping center. I get out and I'm just panicking. I'm just going off. I'm going off, and he's trying to explain something to me. And he's trying to tell me something. Hey, Francois. And I'm just going off. I knew it. I went. And he's trying to explain something. He finally gets through. He says, he's dead. And everything stopped.
Wow.
And I do remember dropping to my knees.
Wow.
I don't remember how long I was there. I know I just remember blanking out, and I started to pray. And I just remember blanking out, and next thing you know, he's waking me up and he's shaking me. And later I asked him, I said, what was going on? He said, you were there for so long, I had to sort of shake you out of it. He said, and then the sirens came, and then we heard sirens, and we heard, helicopter. And he said, you finally got in the car, and you drove off. We drove off. He was still driving because I couldn't see. And I just remember holding the steering wheel because he was rolling on the curb, and he was all over the street. And then I'm getting phone calls at the same time.
Right.
What happened in the barbershop? What happened in the barbershop? 5-10 minutes later. So I'm panicking. We get to my house, and I changed clothes. I don't know why I washed my hands with bleach, and I'm just rushing out the house, and I leave my younger cousin at the house. And then I get to one of the older homies' houses from Gear Gang, and he's like, cuz, this is. But he said, I came downstairs, and I don't remember this. And I just later interviewed him, and I just asked him, what happened that night? He said, you came downstairs in my mama's basement, and you had a Bible in your hand.
Wow.
He said, you were more concerned about offending God than you were about the police.
Wow.
And I remember there was a shift right before all of this happened where I had a sort of, I call it my paw falling off the horse or blinded. I stopped in the middle of the street one night coming from the club, and I just remember just crying. And I had a blunt in my hand, and I just threw it out the window, and I just remember telling God, I don't want this life no more. We were shooting at people, was getting shot at. I was selling, by this time I had, ranked up, and I was selling heavier weight in drugs and so on and so forth, and it became a business, a real business for me. And I just remember telling God, this is too much. I just don't want this life no more. And then all these events led up. So, he going back to where I was at in his basement, he's like, hey man, meet me out here. This is too hot out here for you right now. And I remember we were supposed to meet sort of further outside of the community, and I was going to meet him at his girlfriend's house. Right. And then I left his house, and something told me, go to the church. And I'm just thinking, like, go to the church. It's Friday night. Right. The only church I could see was the church. It's called Now Faith. Now Faith, right outside of our community. And I go to Now Faith, and lo and behold, there's cars outside. The lights are on. I walk into the church, and they direct me to the sanctuary. I walk in. I sit in the back of the church, and they're having a service for young boys, young men. Wow. Troubled youth. Wow. And he's speaking to them, the pastor's speaking to them about their purpose and their assignment, and he's praying over them. He prayed over everybody, and I got there towards the tail end of the service. Right. And the whole time I'm there, my phone is ringing, my heart is beating, and I'm thinking, what is going on, what happened? And then he calls an altar call. And all the young men go to the altar, and I sort of trail behind, and I'm like one of the young men, the last people that the pastor talks to, and he hands me some anointing oil, and he spoke into my life. Wow. I was panicking so much I don't remember everything he said, but I remember him asking me, is it all right? Are you okay? And I remember feeling this warm peace over my body, and I just said, yeah. And as I left, I picked up my phone, I checked my voice messages, and my mom is screaming, don't come to the house. And I can't even barely hear what she said. My younger cousin, I finally get a hold of him. I said, what happened? What's going on? He said, they shot at the house. Wow. They came by, they shot at the house. He thought he was waiting on his friend, and he thought his friend was coming by, and lo and behold, it was somebody that, as soon as he steps out of the house, they start shooting at the house. He dives back in the house, tells my mom to get down, and I end up going to my aunt's house, which is his mother's house. And he was a troubled youth, so he was living with us, and I was supposed to be mentoring him, but setting the wrong example. His OG, I had OG, his OG. And then I get to my aunt's house, and next thing you know, I'm trying to pray over her house, and I go to my girlfriend's house. She was out of town. Her mother was out of town. She was in college. And I see my face on the news. I didn't see my face in the news. I heard them talking about the barbershop incident. Wow. I'm just crying all that night. I ended up, to make a long story short, I ended up going on the run for about a week. Right. And I went to Oklahoma, and my OG, Ray, convinced me into turning myself in. Wow. And I went and turned myself in. I set it up to turn myself in. The night before I turned myself in, they wanted to have a going-away party for me. Lo and behold, the Spirit of the Lord hits the garage while everybody's smoking weed and drinking, hits the garage, and I hugged the homeboy that this all started with. Right. I hug him. He's crying. He says, man, this is all my fault. I shouldn't have went out, and he's blaming himself, and I hug him, and next thing you know, I begin to pray. Wow. And I began to pray over the whole garage and everybody in the garage. And I don't know what happened. I don't even remember what I was saying. I just remember years later somebody told me what I was saying, and what I had prophesied to them had come to pass that night. Wow. Don't know what happened. Turned myself in. That's powerful. And I ended up fighting this court case, this murder case. They charged me with first-degree murder. Wow. And I remember, and didn't give me a bail or a bond. So as soon as I get into the county jail, which is the process you go through. You start in county jail, and while you're fighting your case, if you get a bond, you can get out, you can come home. If you don't get a bond, you got to wait it out. Right. While I'm in there, of course, the guy that I shot and killed, I found out he died that night. The guy that I shot and killed is an East Side Crip. East Side Crips are the largest population in the county jail, in all of the county jails. Wow. Denver, Arapahoe, in all of the county jails. Right. And sure enough, I'm running into enemies. I'm running into people that I know. So nothing will make you turn to the Lord like fighting a murder case. And I just remember thinking, God, if you never bring me home, I still want to serve you. Wow. I remember having to have those thoughts, and I began to develop a relationship with him. He started bringing different people into my life. And we were doing Bible study one night. I come down from Bible study, and they're about to do lockdown, and there's a guy that's standing literally right next to my cell, because his cell, he just got went through intake, and that's when you first come in. And he's standing next to my cell, and I give him a soup. I say, hey man, we do Bible study upstairs, man. Feel free to come in. My name is Fransau. He introduced himself. He started coming to Bible study after a while. And this is going on for about a couple weeks. And, me and him is praying. And he has, his cell is literally right next to my cell. And then one day his cellmate comes and pulls me out of my cell. He said, hey, Fransau, let me holler at you. And his cellmate was old school. We call him old school. I still don't know his name to this day. We just call him old school. Older guy that knew the ropes in jail. He sort of taught me the ropes of county jail, but also he just sort of took me under his wing and just, mentored me in a sense. He seen something in me. Right. He said, but Fransau, let me talk to you. He said, hey, I know about your case. I know nobody talks about their case because that's the rules in here. Right. He said, but I know what happened in the barbershop. I seen your face on the news when I first got in here. He said, I want you to know I support you. He said, but you know the brother that's been coming to Bible study? I said, yeah, he's cool, brother, man. He said, yeah, he's cool. He said, but I heard him talking about his brother. He said, his brother got shot in a barbershop. His brother got shot in O&I's barbershop.
Wow.
His brother's name is Nick Thalley. And I began to I just stopped. And I paused, and he seen a look in my face, and he knew what it was. His brother was the man that I shot and killed. And he and I had developed a relationship. We're praying together. And before you know it, he just lifts his hands up. He said, you didn't hear that from me. You know how this goes. And he walks back in his cell. Well, I walk back in my cell, and I'm just, I'm crying out to God, God, what is this? What are you doing? Is this a setup? Is this something you've ordained? What's going on? And I just began to feel a peace. And the next day, I remember seeing him, and I wanted so bad in my heart to go talk to him and tell him. And I'm like, God, how do I present this conversation to a man? I shot his brother, and I didn't know who he was. I go to a visit. He's watching me walk across the room on the payphone. As I go to my visit, I come back from my visit, and then the correctional officer calls me out. McDonald, over the intercom, McDonald, come to the tower. I go to the tower. He says, McDonald, we need you to pack your stuff up. We need you to do it ASAP. I said, okay, sir, I'll do that. What's it about? He said, well, there's somebody that's involved in your case that's in the same pot. I'm not supposed to be telling you this. He said, but I need you to do it. I said, well, Officer Pearson, can you give me 5 minutes? Right. And by this time, I had developed a relationship with the correction officer. I had been praying for him, and I was, he said, McDonald, what we consider you as a model inmate. He said, that don't mean you snitch. That don't mean anything like that. He said, but you keep the peace in the pod, and we make note of that. Wow. You bring peace in the pod. We make note of that. He said, you got 5 minutes. He said, but you can't take no more time than that. Right. I said, okay, Officer Pearson, I'll be right back. I'll have my stuff ready. I went and got him. I pulled him to my cell. I said, hey, man, can I talk to you for a minute? He comes to my cell. I say, and usually most people are watching. If you take somebody to your cell, it's usually about to go down. You're about to fight. But so people are watching. I go and I close the door to the cell. I said, hey, man, I don't want you to think I was fake or phony. I just found out who you were. I said, and I need you to know that I'm the person that shot your brother. I think it's best that you understand what happened before you judge the matter. And he allowed me to speak. And he allowed me to tell the story. And then after I got done telling it, it was literally a brief, explanation of what happened in the barbershop. And he told me, hey, my mom told me who you were over the payphone. And when she mentioned your name, I told her, no, that can't be him.
Oh, my goodness.
Very similar expression I had when I found out who he was.
Wow.
He said, but I guess, lo and behold, it is you. He said, I understand what you had to do. I know my brother, and I know he's been gangbanging for a while. And he said, I can't fault you. And I asked him for his forgiveness. What seemed like for a forever conversation was literally about a 5-10 minute conversation. And the door swings open. Correctional guard is standing there. Everybody's waiting to come in their cells. They're about to do lockdown. And I hug him.
Wow.
And we made peace. And then I walk into another pod. I still haven't gone to trial.
Right.
I go to trial. A lot of things are being said. A lot of people are changing their testimonies. A lot of things, and I'm having dreams.
Friends.
And these are friends, supposed friends that were in the barbershop that night, and had been intimidated or had been coerced
or cursed by the police,
and now they don't know where the gun came from and who brought out the gun. So my lawyer had to bring out some evidence. Right. In the meantime of me fighting this case, to the one of the guys that came in the barbershop, the one that used a young lady as a shield, actually caught a murder case himself.
Wow.
And lo and behold, he was fighting a murder case for shooting his girlfriend and another woman that So
Wow.
it made me think back what my life could have been or have been taken that night. I get to
Wow.
trial, and we go through the jury trial. I have a public defender that I prayed with every time they came through the
Amen.
door,
That's right.
because public defenders and the district attorneys work for the same office.
That's right.
They work for the same people. They get paid by the same people, and most public defenders are going to ask you to take a deal.
Right.
My public defender said, no, we're going to fight this one, and we believe that we can win it. I believe in you. I believe in this case.
Wow.
I believe in your character. I prayed with them every time. One was an atheist, one was a Catholic. Neither one of them really knew the Lord.
Wow.
And we took it to trial. I got convicted of criminally negligent homicide, which is very similar to involuntary manslaughter, class 5 felony. And as soon as I got out, they convicted me. They gave me a sentence of 3 years. And as soon as I got out, I came to Atlanta. And that's where my life began again. And that's why I say, behold, old things have passed away, all things have become new. And I began to see the newness of life. It was hard. I struggled with job placement, and there's a whole nother story after that. But thanks be to God, he gave me a new start. And here I am today with multiple businesses, a career field, as a felon, just got my real estate license.
Praise God. Congratulations.
And it's just a new start.
That right there was like you were an excellent storyteller. So telling your story and having the ability to tell it from a place of empowerment and power is liberating. And for you to have the testimony that you have and to be standing, and people that may look at you may have never seen or guessed that you had went through half of the things that you did. But you could literally see like God's hand on you throughout everything from that night. To God be even the unctions that you were getting, and then even the going away party.
So many ways.
Was still reminding you every step of the way. But you talked about, there's one thing that you said, just going back a little bit, when you talked about you had actually wanted to get out of gang culture, and you were sort of trying to find a way out right before the incident.
Yeah.
What do you think could have helped you back then?
There was gravitation. There was a pull. I think sort of like Abraham and a lot of the people in the Bible, Moses as well, where God had to pull them out of that community, out of that culture, and get them to somewhere else, to expose them to something else, a step of faith, a leap of faith. I don't think I moved fast enough, and I was supposed to leave sooner. I feel like I was supposed to leave sooner, and I wish I had, and just got into a new environment, because I noticed that when I got to Atlanta, the same thing. Everything shifted, mindset shifted, and I believe that's where God wanted to use me. So I think that's what it may take for those that have been, in those environments. You may have to shift environments. And you may have to shift mental environments. You definitely have to shift mental environments. You have to place yourself in a new place. It's very difficult, and even Jesus said, you have no honor in your home or the place where you're from. A lot of the times, I believe you have to shift environments.
It's so profound, because you talked about environment from the standpoint of when you were a kid, and how you went to this other place that was very different from where you lived, and when you seen it, you're like, wow, this is a whole new world. This is different. It was a different environment for you.
Absolutely.
But when you went back to the environment that you were in, you just accepted it as your reality. But how important environment plays in our lives and our outcomes and young people's lives. And
my God,
if you can just speak to that in terms of environment, the importance of that in our youth when we're trying to help them and just understand the impact of the environment on them and their decision making.
Well, in today's side, you have communities that you have technology that actually takes you outside of your environment. There's so many different ways we can expose them and expand their exposure and their visibility in so many ways. But I think we have to start rethinking how we're raising them and pushing them towards just one way. One of the ways we push them in this way that they may not fit in is college. College is usually rewarded. And we give the reward to the family members in our family that go to college and graduate college. And for me and even some of those that don't maybe fit that category of traditional education and succeeding in traditional education, you start to see it early on in life. I think we have to push them towards vocations. We have to push them towards trades. We have to push them towards sources of income that can meet that same need. And you think about a lot of our youth today and the youth in these communities, they're forced out of the household at earlier ages. They're forced out of the household at 16, 17. By the time you hit 17, 18 years old, you're ready to leave. Your parents are ready to leave because they've been dealing with a rebellious teen for so long. So the conversation is, I can't wait till you leave. And I can't wait. As soon as I hit 18, I'm leaving. Can't wait till you turn 18 so you can get out of my house. Your disrespectful self, so on and so forth. So a lot of us leave. We're not feeling wanted. There's that rejection. There's abandonment. If you don't take to gang culture or drugs or so on and so forth, you're forced to enter the workforce earlier on. We need programs that will prepare you in high school where we used to have drafting. We used to have wood shop. We used to have carpentry. We used to have plumbing and welding and so on and so forth, where as soon as you came out of high school, you could develop, you already had a skill set that can produce income immediately. Same thing with those re-entering citizens, those that are re-entering to society, those citizens, they need those same trade programs. And that's what Felons to Favor is designed to do for both youth as well as those that are coming out of incarceration, to re-implement them into society and get them the skill sets, the knowledge, and the resources, job skills, immediate job placement immediately, but career development, mental health, and so on and so forth.
Right. The mental health piece, and that's amazing what you're doing with Felons to Favor and how you're creating a culture, because it's all about culture too.
That's exactly
for
what
these for them to succeed, coming from incarceration. And we talked a little bit about this before we started recording, but what was it like? What are some of the stressors, the triggers, the trauma that happens when you're incarcerated?
Well, you're always on alert. You always got to watch your back. Like I said, you have to live by a certain set of rules and laws. Right. And then what happens is those same rules and laws don't apply to when you get out as much as you try to apply them. Right. However, you have to find a way to shift that mentality or to shift that skill set as well. You're very structured in the time you have to get up in the morning. You had a job that you had to get to. You had certain things you have to take. But you still have to use that to your advantage. So you still get up at a certain time. You still maintain a schedule. You still maintain. I always like in CDL driving, when that's a program that I like. I usually recommend for those coming out of incarceration that has been a huge success for those that have been they're returning citizens, because it's very likened to that cell and that structure. You see the bunk bed in the back of the and you have your own space. And if there's if you're sharing it with anybody, you're sharing it with one person. Right. Somebody that you're driving with. So it's proven to be a very successful. But you also have other skill sets. I got a brother that Axiom home inspections, Chase, and he does home inspections, but he developed a skill set. He got a certification immediately that didn't hold him back with a felony, and he was able to create income immediately. Wow. And those are the things that I'm recommending for those returning citizens, and even some of these youth that just don't fit in traditional education.
Right. And I love that you said that, because a lot of youth don't. And the way that the world is going, even education, a lot of college and university in the next probably decade is going to be obsolete. Kids actually should need to be launched into careers in high school. High school needs to be a place where they're really actually in their careers, generating income, and that we're creating other opportunities like trades for kids. Because a lot of kids, Generation Alpha, they're not everyone is interested in.
My goodness.
And going into, so the world is changing. Our generation needs and wants something different. And I think you are hitting it right there. These are some of the things we can do. Solutions. These are some of the programs that we can look at for people that are coming out of jail so that we reduce recidivism. But you talked about mental health too. And I want you to sort of hone in on that.
Absolutely.
What happens? Why do we need to worry about the mental health of someone that's coming out of prison?
That is the root. It's not just those that are in prison. It's those that are growing up in these communities. I'm 41 years old. I'm trying to go back to 40, trying to hold on to my 40. But okay. I just started seeing a therapist, and it's been groundbreaking. It's been because now I can identify the root cause of my decision making or my lack thereof in bad decisions. I think if we can get therapy and therapists into our communities and get our communities community to quit looking at therapy as a negative thing, or that you're crazy, which is, usually the perception of therapy or counseling or psychologist or psychiatrist. I think we can break ground, and we can start dealing with the trauma. We can start dealing with the things that we've been faced with as kids, and molestations and, beatings and so on and so forth, domestic violence, and you start dealing with that head on and getting to the root cause of those things. The decision making happens, earlier on, and it prevents, but then it also addresses healing for those that have gone through those things. And once you receive healing, then you can transfer that, and you can go back and start to bring people to that same point of healing. You can speak to it, such as I'm doing right now.
I love it. You talked about it from the standpoint of being proactive, but also helping people once they've gone through that, and thinking about when you're growing up in trauma. And a lot of people don't even realize they've gone through trauma. They have no idea.
You don't even know.
But a lot of people, and most Black people, most communities of colors, they've gone through trauma, and they have no idea that it's trauma.
PTSD.
Nightmares.
Yep.
Recalling events. Anxiety attacks, panic attacks, all those things.
My God, depression,
are some
anxiety.
of depression, anxiety, all of those things are some of the symptoms and signs of trauma. But a lot of people are not aware of that. And you are right, in many communities of color, we talk about this a lot in the organization. And we try our best through innovative ways to really rethink mental health as a way of life, and not as something that's stigmatized or taboo or you're crazy or something is wrong with you. We use the analogy, if you're sick, where do you go? Go to doctor, right? You get a checkup. Yeah. But when something is going on in our heart and our emotions and our mind, we're not willing to go to get the help that we need.
Self-medication.
Absolutely.
Self-medicate. And that's where those cycles of addiction start to happen, those cycles of depression start to happen. And we just really have to look at it as such and break these types of cycles. We have to really address healing in a different way than we've been addressing it. And we have to really rethink it and reverse engineer it in a way.
What does that look like, reverse engineering healing?
Well, I think honestly for me it starts with getting men back in the household, which I think is usually the root cause of our society and our community. If you look at the statistics of fatherless homes, I did a video I did a comparison video on my IG page that has skyrocketed in views because it's a guy that's going through the statistics of fatherless homes. And then he also mentions the Bible verse that I will return the hearts of the fathers back to the children, the hearts of the children back to the fathers. And then there will be healing, and their land will be healed. And that's there's nothing more true than getting the father back into the household and to where we can get the men to where they're supposed to be. Our women don't have to struggle as much. Our women don't have to take on and bear the weight of that responsibility of raising a child on their own. And then our women can be healed, and they can move more into their purpose and calling of being able to succeed. Now, women are thriving. They're succeeding, but they're doing it I think they're doing it harder than they should have to. They need help.
I can tell you,
we're trying to bring help. We're trying to send y'all help. You guys are doing an excellent job. I will commend. I take my hat off to the sisters because you guys are strong
we carry a lot.
and performing. But if we can get the men back in there and we can get the not just fathers but husbands back in there, then I think we have a chance of survival.
I love that. And your culture and where you came from, your story, would you say that the people that you grew up with, what was the percentage of people that have fathers, boys in that culture, that life that had fathers?
My God.
That had fathers in the household.
That had fathers in the household, I would say about 5 to 10%, maybe 15 to 20 in my neighborhood. They had fathers in the household. And then it's even smaller percentage that had fathers that were probably good examples. I would probably say about 5 to 10%.
Wow.
And I can label them. I can think of them by holding up probably 4 to 5 fingers because they stand out so much.
Wow.
I had a Hispanic friend named Dane Dominguez. I remember his dad. May he rest in peace. But he was the postman as well. But I would go over there, and I just loved seeing his interaction with his father.
Wow.
Billy Hageman. I love seeing his reaction. This is a white guy. and then William Wade. These are all my best friends growing up, and his father was present. And I remember the difference in their upbringing that kept them in sports, that kept them attached. And then Nate Mason, how his dad used to come to the games. My mother couldn't come to my games if I played organized sports because she was always working. And when she wasn't working, she was tired. So my support came from, hey, asking the big homies, the OGs, to come. But I think that's where we really have to look at it.
The idea of reverse engineering, you talked about it from the standpoint of healing. How do we reverse engineer those that are in this lifestyle that may be OGs, may be vital to the community? They may be credible messengers.
That's good.
How do we bring them in and reverse engineer that culture?
So Felons to Favor highlights and brings awareness to the accomplishments of those who have overcome these systems, if you will, and found a level of success or favor, which is nothing but God placing, value on a man or woman that said yes finally, after so long of denying that calling, of denying that leadership role and leading in the right way. So I have a friend by the name of Chad Bland, and this is just speaking to reverse engineering. The way he was raised, mother on drugs, father was a pimp, and how he even found himself incarcerated. He began a business from inside of the jail or inside the halfway house, detail business. Now that detail business has grown to wraps and is one of the most successful businesses in Denver, Colorado.
Amazing.
You have to take those examples and take those people, and we have to pull from that. We have to break it down and go back. Now he has to go back, reverse it, and reverse the curse and go back and give back. So now he's hiring more felons through his company than any other company in the state of Colorado.
I love it. And the other thing I'm seeing is that multi-generational approach, because a lot of what happens in gang culture sounds very intergenerational. It's passed down. It's the OG, and then we gotta. So it will take a multi-generational approach to undo.
Now we gotta pass it back down. We gotta pass those businesses down. We gotta pass those skill sets back down. Just like when you used to go out in the field and you stay with dad or uncle, and they walk you through how to fix a car. It's the same way. We have to reinstitute and pass those generationally down, and then there becomes inheritance again, wealth back reinstated back in. We implement life insurance again to our communities, to where wealth can be transferred and passed down, and the next generation doesn't have to struggle as much. And then they have an example, and they also have the tangible wealth to pass down to the next generation after that.
I love that. And I'm seeing it from multiple viewpoints, macro, systemically. On a policy level, there are things that we can do, because a lot of this is systemic poverty, structural poverty. A lot of it is systems, and then we have things on a communal level.
Now, we can go on about this, but you're absolutely right. Legislation has to change. We have to come and we have a unified voice in our communities and legislation. They've taken our voting power away by taking most of us and incarcerating us, giving us felonies, and now we can't vote. And then the ones that are voting, is our voice strong enough? Then we have to put our people, when I say our people, those who are for our community, and not just taking a set of people that say they're for our community but don't know our struggle as much. Now they just throw them at us and say, hey, pick one. All right, which one is best or which one sounds like that? No, what we have to do is raise our leaders into those positions, and then also raise our community into the people, the positions that we need. Law enforcement. We need them in law enforcement. We need banking systems. We need, and so on and so forth. I think we really have to rethink the system in and of itself and put legislation at the forefront. We only vote on presidential elections. We don't understand that voting people, our mayors and those are elected officials, our city council members, is really where it starts.
That's right.
And we don't put enough emphasis on those positions and on the groundwork that needs to be built in order to rebuild our society and get the resources that we need into our schools, those trade programs. And that's where it really starts is vocations and trades with legislation.
That's right. And as we're coming to a close, this has been absolutely amazing.
Great discussion.
But we did not hit on the church. How can we leverage the, how do I say this? How could we leverage the church, the influence
Absolutely.
of the church, of church
My
leaders and church programs to help shift this culture and this system.
That's good. I heard an interview that you did with, I believe it was Sean Smith, and I think he's on the right track. I think that you use the church and you use the influence that the church has. You use the buildings that they have. You use the tax shelters that they have to partner with other programs and quit trying to do it all on our own. You use the church to bring those partnerships together to address all of those needs. The same thing that you're doing as well with your program. Is how I think that's the only way we have a fighting chance. And that's the way, if we look at history and we look at other cultures, such as the Hispanic culture and how they've unified and how they've come together. They may have 10 families in one house.
That's the
Same
truth.
thing with the church. We have 10 businesses or 10 different in one house. And how we use that until we can get them to sustain themselves and open up another center, life center, development center. I call them development and growth centers. And the church has more influence than any other.
That's
quit letting the politicians, quit letting legislation, quit letting all those other key factors.
Is the most powerful.
Absolutely.
When people are running for office, where do they go?
Where they go? They go straight to the church.
When there's a crisis, where do they go?
To the
when
church.
There's a funeral, where do they go?
To the church.
They are at the church.
So the kingdom has a lot more power and authority than we think we have. Right. The kingdom of God and the church has a lot more influence than we think we have. If we can leverage that, I believe that's God's original plan.
Wow.
Absolutely.
That's powerful. We talked about so much. We may have to break this podcast
That's
up,
okay, I know.
This
is a great conversation.
We talked about so much. The conversation has to continue. We have to reshape systems from the inside out.
My God.
Through reverse engineering, healing, bringing fathers back into the home, husbands back into the home, through legislation, through policy, through reshaping systems, through involving the church, through leveraging, even reversing engineer, as we talked about, through bringing those people that are in gang culture, bringing them in because they have skill sets that we need, that's vital to our community.
My God.
And they are valuable to our community.
They need to know that.
They're valuable to our community. That's
Absolutely.
the part that we
That's the part we miss. We look at just gang culture as something, but they were our protection. They were they were the key influence. They were and there's unhealthy pride, a healthy but unhealthy pride in knowing that, hey, that's my cousin. You don't want to mess with him. They you know what I mean? But you're absolutely right. I think we can use that as well.
I love it. Well, this has been absolutely amazing. Are there any words of wisdom that you want to leave for us before we close our podcast episode this evening?
Again, I think it all goes down to old things have to pass away and all things have to become new. If there's, and that reverse engineering is simply just breaking down a system or breaking down something, mechanics and evaluating, how it was compiled, how we got to this point, and then going back and fixing those things that we know, starting with mental health, that we know needs to be addressed. And from every point of the family structure, from our youth to our men, from our men to our youth, we have to really, and I think we can do it. I think it's going to be a unified effort, and I have hope that people like you, myself, the Sean Smiths of the world, the Jericas of the world, and your team and what we're doing, I think we will definitely have an impact, and that's what we're called to do.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you so much. Y'all, this is Fransau Mcdonald. How can people follow you, get in touch with your organization, support what you're doing, and follow your work?
So Felons to Favor, Instagram, Felons #2 Favor, Instagram, Fransau at felons2favor.com. You can find me Felons to Favor Facebook as well, Felons to Favor podcast, where I interview those who have overcome, recidivism, overcome those things and found success. So Felons to Favor, everything you can find me. Just type it in.
I love it. Felons to Favor. Please look up Fransau and his organization. He's doing amazing work. He is literally innovative. He is changing the system and changing the game. And I am so honored and blessed to have talked to you, learned so much, and breath of fresh air, very inspired.
Absolutely.
And now we're going to be rethinking even the way that we do our life with our youth.
We found a new partnership.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
This is just the beginning.
We're really excited about that. But we appreciate all of you so much. I know there was a lot to digest. This was just a really amazing podcast. A lot to learn. We want you to share this out to everybody in your family. Share it to your uncles, your aunts, your niece, your nephew, your brother, your sister, your auntie, nene. Share it to everybody. Share it to your network. Share it to your colleagues. We want to get the message out. And again, ATL and those that are watching from other places, we appreciate you. We love you so much. And stay tuned. We'll be back. Thank you.